Welcome, dear friends, and let me tell you a story of love's resilience, a story of how two souls endured unimaginable hardship and injustice only to have fate grant them a second chance at happiness. Enjoy the story. David Rockingham stomped into the penthouse suite, his face redder than a ripe tomato ready to burst. Veins bulged from his forehead as he clutched a manila envelope, knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. "Sarah, get your lying, cheating self in here right now," he bellowed, spittle flying from his mouth. Sarah tentatively entered the room, back rigid with fear. She knew that tone all too well. David was in one of his rages again, and when David raged, someone always got hurt. "What's wrong, dear?" she asked meekly, hands unconsciously smoothing her silk robe. David's eyes narrowed to slits as he ripped open the envelope, tossing it aside. He thrust the photos directly in Sarah's face, nearly smacking her with them. "Care to explain just what the hell this is?" he snarled. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she glimpsed the glossy images. They depicted her warmly embracing a tall, handsome man outside the hospital where she volunteered. He was presenting her with a modest bouquet of daisies, her favorite flower. Sarah's face was alight with genuine happiness, an expression David had never once brought to her features. "Well?" David's harsh tone snapped her from her reverie. "Who is he? What's his profession? Start talking." Sarah opened and closed her mouth at a complete loss for words. She knew she should confess the truth. That kind, caring Bill worked as an ambulance driver, and she had developed feelings for him. But the thought of David's inevitable volcanic reaction terrified her to her core. David grabbed a fistful of her robe, yanking her forward until their faces were mere inches apart. "I'm waiting," he hissed. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as memories flooded back. 12 years earlier. Sarah sobbed uncontrollably, her body racked with grief. The horrific image of her beloved father's mangled body refused to leave her mind. One minute he was waving goodbye, headed off to another business meeting. The next, an oncoming semi had barreled through a red light, smashing into his sedan with incredible force. The medical bills were astronomical, hundreds of thousands of dollars that Sarah, a struggling artist, could never hope to pay, even if she worked 3 lifetimes. She was well and truly destitute, with no way to even give her father a proper burial. That's when David had slithered into her life like a serpent, smelling her vulnerability. She'd always found the wealthy businessman's lingering stares and overtly sexual comments wildly inappropriate. But he kept insinuating that he could make all her financial issues disappear, for a price. Sarah had been appalled at first by his indecent proposal. He would pay every penny she owed, allowing her to bury her father with dignity. In return, she would become his wife and permanent bedmate. A shudder of revulsion had ripped through her at the prospect. But David had played a merciless game, whispering dark suggestions that perhaps her father's accident hadn't been an accident at all. He'd made it clear that denying him could have deadly consequences for her and anyone she cared about. With no other options available, Sarah had resigned herself to her fate, shedding countless tears as she committed to being David's purchased plaything. Present day. Sarah swallowed hard, David's beefy hand still clutching her robe like a vice. She had no choice. She had to tell him everything. Maybe some part of him, deeply buried, still had a shred of humanity. His name is Bill," she stammered, unable to meet David's piercing glare. "He's an ambulance driver I met at the hospital." A cruel smile twisted David's lips. "Is that so? An ambulance driver? How precious!" His tone dripped with condescension. "And just what did you think the two of you lovebirds could possibly have together? He'd never be able to give you even a fraction of what I can provide." Sarah felt ill hearing David objectify her yet again, as if she were merely a possession to be bought and owned. But she had to keep going. Maybe if she was fully honest, David would show mercy. I've developed feelings for him," Sarah confessed, bracing herself. "Romantic feelings. But we've never been physical, I swear it." She trembled as David's face contorted with rage. Grabbing a fistful of her hair, he wrenched her head back violently. "You stupid slut!" he roared, spraying spittle across her face. "After everything I've done for you? I plucked you out of the gutter and this is how you repay me?" Sarah cried out in pain, hot tears streaming down her cheeks. "David, please, I'm so sorry. It'll never happen again, I promise." Releasing her with a contemptuous shove, David turned on his heel and stormed out, bellowing over his shoulder. "You're damn right it won't. I'll see to that." Crumpling to the floor, Sarah was gripped with icy dread. What terrible vengeance did David have planned for poor innocent Bill? 3 days later. Sarah paced anxiously in the cold, sterile waiting room of City Hospital. Her friend Emily, a nurse, had urgently summoned her here with horrifying news. "Oh, Sarah, it's just awful," Emily gushed breathlessly as Sarah rushed up. "That sweet ambulance driver you've had your eye on. Bill? Well, he was just arrested for drug trafficking." Sarah's knees nearly buckled at the words. Drug trafficking? Bill? It was utterly nonsensical. She had to get to the bottom of this. What are the charges exactly?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice even. Emily's eyes widened with undisguised glee. "They say he had an entire ambulance packed with illegal narcotics. Can you believe it? And coming from him of all people." She shook her head in feigned disbelief. Sarah felt her stomach roiling. This reeked of one of David's vengeful schemes. He was setting Bill up, probably planting evidence to take away the man she loved. The thought was too much. Sarah's vision swam and darkened as she crumpled to the floor in a dead faint. 20 years later. Sarah violently scrubbed the dingy tiles of the hospital bathroom, trying in vain to expunge the grout of deep-set grime. Her hair was lank and graying, her face prematurely aged beyond her years by hardship. Once a brilliant academic on the cusp of a master's degree, Sarah was now a downtrodden janitor at City Hospital, the very place her life had taken such a disastrous turn 2 decades prior. After Bill's shocking arrest, she had tried desperately to prove his innocence, but David's wealth, influence, and underhanded tactics had railroaded them both. Bill was convicted on bogus charges and given an outrageous 25-year sentence. As for Sarah, she too was appallingly charged as an accessory for conspiring to traffic the drugs. Though she received a lighter 5-year term, it was still enough to destroy her future and mark her permanently as a convicted felon. No prestigious university or career opportunity would ever accept her after that. She had resigned herself to a life as a penniless, ostracized pariah until today. A brutal stroke of fate, yet one that carried a glimmer of hope. Sarah startled as the bathroom door burst open, a team of paramedics rushing in with a battered, bloodied body on a stretcher. A homeless man, by the look of his tattered clothing and unkempt beard. "Hit by a car downtown," one of the medics shouted tersely. "No ID, no pulse, we're calling it." As they transferred the corpse to the tile, Sarah felt an electric jolt she hadn't experienced in 2 decades. Despite the mangled features and grizzled hair, she recognized the man instantly. It was Bill. She shoved her way past the medics, earning her irritated scowls. "Let me try something, please!" Not waiting for permission, Sarah tilted Bill's head back, ignoring his lolling jaw and glassy, vacant eyes. Pinching his nose closed, she sealed her lips over his cold, bluish ones. She blew a mighty breath into his lungs, then another and another, recalling her CPR training from years before. "Come on, Bill," she urged desperately between breaths. "Don't you dare leave me again." The medics watched, dumbfounded, as this haggard janitor fought so fervently to revive the John Doe who had been as good as dead minutes ago. After what felt like an eternity, Bill's body mercifully convulsed. A guttural wheeze escaped his lips as his eyes fluttered open, searching and unfocused. Sarah cupped his whiskered cheek, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. "It's me, Bill. It's Sarah. You're alive." Though his mind was clearly addled, something deep within Bill's eyes flickered with recognition. His chapped lips parted as if to speak, but only a raspy croak escaped. One of the medics finally regained his senses, pulling Sarah away from the revived man. "What the hell, lady? Do you know this bum?" Sarah nodded vigorously, swiping at her damp cheeks. We have a history, a long one." As the now stabilized patient was wheeled to a room for further treatment, an authoritative voice rang out. Sarah Rockingham, I can't believe it." Sarah turned to face the newcomer, a tall, graying man in an immaculate suit. It was Dr. Michael Vincetti, head of the hospital board, the very man whose own mother's life she had saved years ago during a complicated childbirth. "Dr. Vincetti," she replied, flushing with shame over her bedraggled appearance. "I didn't expect you to remember me." The doctor's eyes crinkled warmly. "How could I forget the brave young nurse who sacrificed her own safety to talk my hysterical mother through her labor? You were so calm, so reassuring." His smile faded as he took in her janitor's garb. "Though I must admit, I'm surprised to find you working in such a capacity here." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. Perhaps it was time, after all these years, to finally unburden herself to someone. Taking a steadying breath, she launched into the gut-wrenching tale of the past 2 decades, her loveless marriage to David Rockingham, his vengeful framing of her soulmate Bill, and her own unjust incarceration. She bared her soul, holding nothing back about the suffering she had unfairly endured. By the time she finished, Dr. Vincetti's expression was ashen with horror. "My God, Sarah, I had no idea. No wonder you've fallen to such depths." His fist clenched with righteous anger. "But no more! This grave injustice cannot be allowed to go unanswered any longer." Sarah gaped at him, hardly daring to hope. What do you mean?" The doctor placed a comforting hand on the small of her back, guiding her from the room with a determined stride. "You're coming with me. We're going to get you the legal representation you deserve, to finally clear your name and Bill's fully." 2 weeks later. The front-page headline of the Daily Bugle shouted the tragic news that had rocked the entire city. "Billionaire dead in freak accident. David Rockingham killed in explosion." Sarah sat in stunned silence, clutching the paper as hot tears traced down her cheeks. According to the report, David had been killed instantly when the furnace in his sprawling mansion inexplicably exploded, leveling half the home. For 2 decades, she had endured his cruel torment and oppression as his purchased bride. Now, by some cosmic twist of fate, he was gone from this earth in the most random and unexpected of ways. But the bombshell report contained even more staggering news. Since David had died without legal heirs or a written will, his vast fortune and business empire were to be awarded to Sarah as his surviving spouse, a form of cosmic restitution for the decades of abuse and false imprisonment she had endured at his hands. Sarah's head spun as she tried to wrap her mind around the staggering figure. Over $2 billion in assets, all now belonging to her. All because of one chance encounter at the hospital that fateful day when she had resuscitated the homeless man who turned out to be Bill. A warm hand squeezed her shoulder. Sarah looked up into the kind eyes of Dr. Vincetti and his mother, the renowned attorney Mrs. Elaine Jarvis. Thanks to their tireless efforts, Sarah and Bill had been fully exonerated and pardoned, their records wiped clean. "This is all for you two," Elaine said gently. "You've both suffered more than enough injustice for 10 lifetimes. Now you can start fresh." At that moment, the hospital room door opened and a nurse escorted Bill inside, looking healthier and more vibrant than he had in decades. His face broke into a tearful smile at the sight of Sarah. "My darlin'," he rasped in his thick Texas drawl, crossing the room to pull her into a tender embrace. "I can't believe it's really you after all this time." Sarah melted into his arms, breathing in his comforting scent as memories flooded back. That first spark at the hospital, their dreams of a life together, and then the cruel way it had been snatched away. But now, by this miraculous twist of fate, they were free. "It's really me, Bill," she murmured, cupping his weathered cheek, "and I'm never letting you go again." 6 months later, the sprawling Rockingham estate gleamed with fresh paint and landscaping, having been lavishly renovated and restored to its former grandeur. Sarah and Bill strolled hand in hand through the lush gardens, reveling in the life of luxury that was now theirs. Gone were the days of back-breaking labor and sleeping in squalid shelters. Now they wanted for nothing, surrounded by every opulent indulgence, all paid for by the ill-gotten riches of the man who had made their lives a living hell for so long. Yet they found their greatest joy not in material possessions, but in each other's company, and the freedom to start anew after so many lost years. As they reached the gazebo, gaily decorated for the impending celebration, Sarah paused to admire the crisp icing on the towering wedding cake. "I still can't believe this is really happening," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "After everything, we're finally going to be husband and wife." Bill squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You deserve this and so much more, darlin'. No more sufferin', no more tears. Just you, me, and all the happiness in the world from here on out." Sarah leaned her head against his broad chest, letting his strong heartbeat soothe her lingering demons. "I love you, Bill, more than you'll ever know." "And I love you, Sarah," he replied, tilting her chin up to meet his adoring gaze. "Forever and always, come what may." Their lips met in a passionate, loving kiss, the first of countless more to come as they began the rest of their lives together at long last. As dusk fell over the estate, the garden filled with well-wishers, Dr. Vincetti and Elaine looked on with paternal pride as Sarah and Bill exchanged vows, the blushing bride resplendent in her gown. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the crowd erupted in raucous cheers and applause. Sarah and Bill beamed, twin tears of joy rolling down their cheeks. Their nightmare was finally over. Now they would take their long-denied chance at true happiness, and nobody would ever stand in their way again.